Blog Talk Radio.
All right, here we go, bro. You ready?
I'm ready. Power in the people.
Finally, hey.
Power in the people. Power in the people. Power in the people. We gon' fight, we gon' shout for our rights without a doubt. We gon' love, we gon' sing, we gon' rise and do our thing. We gon' stand and join hands, united as one, we're in demand. Hear our voice, young and old, fight the lies, let the truth be told. Power in the people. Power in the people.
All right. Well, hopefully we are on and ready to go. Reg, you there, man?
I'm here.
All right, cool. This is the Build 720, and happy Father's Day for everyone.
Happy Father's Day.
Yeah, definitely. Today we are going to be talking about Father's Day. And first, before we go, I definitely like to give an ashe and a shout-out to both of our compadre, man. He transitioned. Some people would know that to pass away or died on February of this year, so I definitely like to dedicate this to him. Now he's with the ancestors. His name is Alberto McFarland. So just a quick moment of silence, and then we'll get it on. All right. Peace out to Fonz. All right, Reg, so today, man, we're just going to be talking like we usually do about various topics, and today we're going to go into Father's Day. And what that means, and the question today is basically, man, you know, happy Father's Day for who? You know, and that's the biggest question that we want to talk about, specifically for African Americans or African people in general across the Miafa or the diaspora and non-white people, basically, and see what it means. But before we go, I definitely want to read a quote from a book that I highly recommend called The United Independent Compensatory Code, System and Concept by Neely Fuller Jr. And what the definition basically of what a man is. His first definition is any male person classified as, quote, white, unquote, who is also treated as, quote, unquote, white in any socio-material system or situation that is directly or indirectly dominated by white supremacy, racism. And then the second part of that is any male person classified as, quote, non-white, unquote, who is not directly or indirectly dominated by and or subjugated to white supremacy. And that's on page 279 of his book. And then he also goes on to give a brief definition within title, within his book, the section of on page 241 where it says black man and or black woman. Part of this he goes on to say, no, quote, black, unquote, and or, quote, non-white, unquote, person can be correctly called a, quote, man, unquote, or a woman, quote, unquote, and at the same time be subject to white supremacy, racism. So, man, Reg, I mean, what do you think about that, man? Do you think that we can be like men or so-called fathers under a quote-unquote racist system? I mean, can we truly have our own concepts, have our own way of thinking as men? I mean, what are your thoughts on that, bro?
Well, we probably can't do it like in the truest sense, like back to nature and back to, our ancestors. I mean, everything that we're dealing with today, I think, has, basically been taught to us, or basically, our environment is, this is what we deal with every day. So when we look at, generation to generation to generation, somewhere in there, the idea, I think, of fatherhood I'll say it's changed. I was going to say it's been lost, but I'll change that to say that it's been changed or altered, because it doesn't mean the same thing that it meant, like way back in with our ancestors.
Yeah, man, I totally agree. I mean, it's unfortunate that, we lost that connection to what it may have meant to be a father or a quote-unquote man.
Right.
Like, for example, like teaching your son, okay, well, I'm going to teach you how to fish based on these principles because we're going to show you how to fish correctly.
Right.
Or I'm going to teach you in this tongue, in this native tongue, whatever that may have been. Some people, the Yoruba, the Zulu, whatever dialect or tongue that our ancestors spoke at that time, that was passed down from generation to generation. And going through the rites of passage of what I've read, on each stage of our life, we were taught, okay, within our culture, within what we saw as being a man or a woman, that was passed down from generation to generation. So we kind of had a foundation, and from what I've read and from what I've heard, is that not only would, our direct fathers, but we're talking about basically all men in the so-called village, taught different disciplines, from, as I said before, hunting, gathering, to whatever it may have been at that particular time, smelting, wood carving,
right,
et cetera, et cetera. So we had that dynamic within a community. And obviously, as time went on, now we're in modern day times when we've lost that connection in some form, in some fashion. And, the question is basically how do we try to get that back, man? How do we try to go from, okay, this is what we had at this particular point in time, and how could we translate that to modern day times when we're just so inundated with a particular kind of way of thinking?
Right. Well,
right,
I think...
I don't know.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, is there any way that we can kind of pull from those principles and values and transfer them in this modern day and time?
Well, I think the answer to that is yes. Also, I think that it's going to take a lot of effort on, our part as an African American community, because, let's take our fathers and our grandfathers just for us. They lived in different time periods. They lived in a different time when the world was calmer, when the world was simpler, didn't have so much technology, and family was the number one thing. I mean, there was no question about that. And so in some eras, family meant responsibility. And then I think for, previous generations, just, not too long ago, I think that there was a number of boys who became fathers. And so if boys become fathers, then there's really no way for them to even know how to be a father because they're still boys. And if they don't have fathers who are teaching them or dads around or anything, then it makes it really, really difficult to then raise, a group of, African American boys to be men. And so I guess maybe lost kind of the word that I was looking for, because I feel that in some regards that I was one of those lost boys, and in order for me to gain my manhood and to, try to be a positive role model, not just to my family, but to the community, that it's taken a lot of me reaching out and trying to learn and being open to learning and not buying into the system. I mean, of course, I think we all buy into the system because it's in our faces every single day. But to be able to look at that, realize what it is, and then say, you know what, I'm going to learn about my culture. I'm going to learn about my ancestry, because it's really important. And if anyone ever tells, a person that their ancestry is not important, then you probably need to take a look at why that person is saying that, because it sounds like they might have some other agenda.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a valid point. Reg, before we continue in this conversation, we have about 15 minutes left. The guest call-in number is 516-666-9835. That's 516-666-9835, and this is the Build 720. So, yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I mean, oftentimes, man, we've had this conversation back and forth, and sometimes when I talk to individuals, and I'm like, well, why don't you want to learn a language that would be considered, and I'm specifically talking about non-white people, like, why wouldn't you want to learn, your or some culture or some part of, your idea of what you might have spoke before, you actually spoke English. And in our particular case as black men, it's a little difficult because, we don't have that connection, right? We don't have a place that we can go and say, oh, well, I'm directly from Nigeria, for example, or
right.
I'm directly from Zimbabwe, or I'm directly from Egypt. We don't have that direct connection. However, I just feel that in my humble opinion, we really don't need just one type of, okay, well, I have to be Nigerian, I need a DNA test. Like, I feel that if we just pick and choose whatever part of our culture, it's an African-centered perspective. Now, that doesn't mean to take away from anybody else's culture or learning a different language. I think a person should learn as many languages as they possibly can. But, yeah, I mean, the question begs is, why someone wouldn't want to at least try to introduce themselves, or at least try to look at a particular language, at least just to start and say, okay, well, this looks like something that I can maybe at least start off with. Because we also have to realize, too, is that, these languages pass down from generation to generation. So if all our kids know, and I'm specifically talking about non-white people, is if all our kids know is just English, 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 or European language, French, 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 right? I mean, some people even said the meta-nature is a dead language, and I totally disagree. It's only dead if people stop speaking it, and I do know some sources out there that people are still reading, and writing. It's
right.
taking a bit, but they're still out there reading and writing the meta-nature, and obviously there's tons of other, quote-unquote African language that we can pick and choose from. But, yeah, man, I mean, why do you think that, in your humble opinion, why do you think that people, or at least try to get introduced or introduce themselves to a particular quote unquote African language.
Well, again, going back to what I said earlier about boys, becoming fathers, I think that has a lot to do with it. I mean, there's a big difference in our dads who probably had their dads around because that in that particular time period, that's how it was done. That's what was done. That's what was expected. And so as we move forward, it just became this thing of, teenage boys getting girls pregnant, not really having the resources, financially, not really having the resources in an education sense. I mean, a lot of things go into that. So then instead of building a family, it turns into this thing of hustling to try to make sure that you can have food on the table for the next day or, have clothes for the kid. I mean, I think all of it, what, the fathers are trying to do is good, but I think that at the same time it's a little bit, it can be a little misguided because they're just thinking in terms of their inner circle, their little family, when it should be thought of as community. And I think that's the bigger issue, is that we've gotten away from talking to one another. We've gotten away from visiting with one another. I mean, let's say right now in 2015, everything is so isolated. I mean, I live 3,000 miles away from my family. When does that happen? That probably never happened, I would say, like 30 years ago maybe. Everyone's close. Everyone's tight. So why would someone not want to? Because they're not educated, and that's the hard part. And I don't mean they're dumb or they're stupid. I just mean that they haven't taken the time to learn something new, and the idea or the thought of learning something new is tiring to them, or it's boring to them, or what are they going to get out of it? So in order to get people more involved with that, and especially young fathers, to get them to open their minds and to open their hearts, is you have to look at it in the bigger sense and say, look, this is for your child growing up in this world, because we don't want this same world 10 years from now. We don't want the same world 5 years from now. But,
right.
Just to put this on a broader scale, and it's not just their kids. I mean, I don't have any kids, but I definitely care about all of the children that are growing up right now, because they are, and this, it sounds cheesy, I guess, but they really are the future. You don't realize how impactful that statement is until, you embrace it and you look at it and you say, this is really true. These are the people who are going to be running the world. And so we want to make sure that some of our African brothers and sisters, ascend to that place where they're not subservient to the system, that they know about it, they know how to deal with it, and maybe they're finally in there running things.
Guest calling number 516-666-9835, 516-666-9835. This is the Build 720. And you bring up a good point, man. I think that, another thing that we might want to get into, and we have about 7 minutes on the call right now, is, fatherhood, or more so what it is to be a man. What does the society say? And particularly, I'll just say it's global. I won't just say American society. I think, what is our definition of a man? Like providing, and what as a man are we supposed to provide? What's your thoughts, bro, on that one? Because I'll give you my 2 cents, but I want to hear you first.
Well, I mean that's a very broad question, and I really don't feel that I'm qualified to answer. So in the sense of what my ideal would be, if I had a father in my life, what would my ideal be? So I will answer it from that standpoint, because I think it would be unfair to a lot of fathers for me to just say this is what it is, especially since I haven't experienced. I would say my ideal would be that it would be someone who is supportive, someone who is a mentor, and someone who, oh man, I mean those are two big things right there. I mean, from a mentor you can get support, but just generally, someone you can go to and talk to about anything that's bothering them. They'll listen. It's not necessary that they will agree with you, but they will at least listen to you and let you vent, and just, I don't know, I guess another source, or a source that looks like you, who you came from, who hopefully knows you sometimes better than you do, and to have that guidance. That's it. But I mean, these words are all kind of synonymous anyway. But mentorship, guidance, and support. That's what I would say.
Yeah, and that sounds like a great definition, man. I mean, I think one of the things that, and I don't know if this is something that would be considered a stereotype or something that's expected for a quote-unquote man, but I think we live in a very capitalistic society. And a lot of the times, part of what it's quote-unquote being a man is to provide a certain level of income, right, to yourself and to your family. And say, for example, and unfortunately this happens where, there might be a young man who may have gotten himself in a situation, and depending on what it is, like, for example, if it was selling drugs of whatever sort, whatever kind that may be, and then instead of getting the penalty that should be justified for that particular quote-unquote offense, instead of getting, like, for example, a year in probation, right, in some quote-unquote correctional facility, like, they'll get 8 or 10 years out of their lives, right?
Yeah.
And so now you're looking at somebody coming out of the prison system, and you have something on their record, and it's not even saying, okay, well, I can just come out here, and get a job. How am I supposed to get a job when I've been in jail for 10 years, when in actuality, that person should have maybe not even been in jail for a year for maybe selling, a bag of whatever. Now, I've never sold, drugs, but so I can't be the one that, could really talk about, that particular situation, but I'm just giving a scenario where a person is coming out from a situation and isn't really being rehabilitated to come back, in the society. And we have, unfortunately, a lot of scenarios like that, which is just one. And so now, they come out the system and they're like, well, I got to provide money. As you mentioned earlier, I got to pay rent, and I have to do a lot of things instead of just trying to focus on trying to take care of themselves, and then also trying to say, okay, well, now I have time to teach, and I have time to pass down information. But unfortunately, man, like, I think for many of us, especially our generation, we were just taught a lot of, okay, this is what you're supposed to do.
Right.
You know, and there wasn't any guidance to that. It was just like, oh, you're on your own. Good luck. You're not going to run into anything in the system. Go to school, go to college. You get out, get a nice job, have a little family, and then, okay, I guess that's what we're supposed to do. So, all right, well, you know, I guess we have about a minute left in the show. So if you're listening, thanks for listening. The guest calling number, once again, is 516-666-9835, and today was the topic of Father's Day. Reg, is there anything else, man, you want to say before we get off the call?
Nope.
All right, man. Well,
it was a good talk, and you know, I think a big shout out of Happy Father's Day goes to you because you're holding it down, and you know, it's a good thing.
All right, cool. Thanks, man. And same to you, man. You know, in terms of the African village, we're all fathers, we're all teachers at some point in our life. You know, regardless if we have immediate children responsibility. So once again, thanks for everybody for listening. This is the Build 720, and we will talk to you later. All right, peace.
Peace.